You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of like total precision.
Oh, yeah, like engineering or something.
Right. You break your arm, the x-ray shows the jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, there it is.
It's very binary. We like things to be visible, categorized.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when you look at global economics or the wealth gap or even just trying to survive the modern corporate rat race, that x-ray machine is completely broken.
Yeah. It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
It really is. So, okay, let's unpack this. What if I told you the perfect MRI for our modern economic anxieties is actually a 2,000-year-old transcript from the Han Dynasty?
I mean, it sounds like a massive exaggeration, right?
Yeah.
But the text we are looking at today, the Discourses on Salt and Iron, is exactly that.
And this wasn't just some philosophical thought experiment, right? Like a lone scholar in a bamboo forest.
No, not at all. Compiled roughly around 81 BCE, it is the official, literal record of China's very first major national debate on economic policy and governance.
Which is wild. So we're going to take that ancient transcript, blow the dust off it, and use it as a highly practical map for you. We're talking about wealth building, cognitive upgrading, and navigating what we call workplace involution.
Right, because if you are trying to understand why it feels inherently difficult to build capital today, or, how to adopt generative AI without losing your mind.
These ancient scholars mapped out the underlying mechanics millennia ago. It's crazy.
It is. But to understand the stakes, we have to look at the geopolitical pressure cooker of the Western Han Dynasty at that specific moment. Emperor Wu had been waging these massive, protracted military campaigns against the Xiongnu.
Those were the nomadic confederation to the north, right?
Exactly, a very formidable enemy. We are talking about decades of mobilizing massive cavalry units, extending supply lines across brutal terrain, building fortifications.
And war on that scale burns capital faster than literally anything else in human history.
Oh, without a doubt. The imperial treasury was just hemorrhaging wealth. So to prevent the state from collapsing under its own military ambitions, the government's chief financial architect stepped in.
This guy, Sang Hongyang.
Yes, a highly pragmatic operator. He recognized that traditional land taxes were, they were no longer sufficient. He needed revenue streams that were vast, immediate, and entirely under central control. So he implemented a state monopoly.
But he didn't just go after luxury goods. That's the crazy part. He went after the absolute baseline necessities for human survival. Salt and iron.
Right. You could no longer boil seawater for salt. You could no longer smelt iron ore privately. You had to buy them directly from the state infrastructure.
Wow. And on the other side of this policy, you have the literati.
The Confucian scholars, yes, summoned from across the empire to evaluate these policies. They represented the local populations, the traditional moral order, and essentially the free market.
So they were arguing that the state should retreat, lower taxes, let the natural economy dictate production.
Exactly. It's the ultimate heavyweight title fight, the central planner against the free market advocates.
And I want to jump straight into the mechanics of this, because Sang Hongyang's monopolies triggered a really catastrophic drop in the quality of life for the average citizen.
It was devastating. The text notes that when the state took over, the price of salt skyrocketed by 3 times.
3 times. But the iron monopoly is where the systemic failure truly revealed itself, right? The quality of iron tools, plows, hoes, sickles, it dropped by 50%.
50%. And we have to consider what a 50% drop in tool quality means in an agrarian society. If you are a peasant farmer in 81 BCE, your entire livelihood depends on the timing of the harvest.
Right.
But the state-run foundries were managed by bureaucrats. They had quotas to hit. They didn't care about the end user, so they mass-produced these heavy, brittle, terribly designed implements.
So the farmer can't afford the good tools, and the cheap tools just shatter in the dirt. Suddenly, a field that took 2 days to plow takes 6. You miss the planting window.
And when agricultural efficiency plummets, harvests fail. When harvests fail in the ancient world, people simply starve.
God.
The literati argued that Sang Hongyang successfully enriched the state treasury, but he broke the back of the working class doing it.
Okay, but I have to stop you there and play devil's advocate for a second, because Sang Hongyang isn't completely wrong here.
How so?
Well, we look back and criticize the brittle plows, but if you have Xiongnu cavalry massing on the northern border, you don't have time for the invisible hand of the free market to, optimize iron production.
That's a fair point.
You need capital immediately to fund the armies standing between the populace and total annihilation. If the empire falls, the free market is dead anyway. Doesn't an existential crisis demand draconian financial control?
That is exactly Senghung Young's defense. He argues that the state is the parent of the empire. To protect the household from outside invaders, the parent must have absolute authority over the family finances.
Right. It's a harsh utilitarian logic, prioritizing collective survival over individual prosperity.
But the literati counter that with a deeply moral argument. They essentially ask what kind of parent competes with their own children for food.
Oh, wow. That's heavy.
It is. It strikes at the heart of the inherent contradiction between state wealth and private wealth. The source material uses this brilliant analogy to illustrate this finite dynamic.
Okay, what is it?
Imagine the total wealth of the nation is water in a deep well. The state, needing funds, drops a massive industrial pipe into that well to siphon the water out. What happens to the citizens?
Let me guess. They get nothing.
They are left standing around the edges, trying to sip from the remaining damp earth with tiny straws. The literati understood that wealth in this era was fundamentally a zero-sum game between the ruler and the ruled.
Yeah, but the literati's proposed alternative, completely dismantling the monopolies and returning to a pure free market, that isn't a utopia either.
Not at all.
The text explicitly acknowledges the dark side of the unrestricted market. Before the intervention, wealthy merchants were hoarding basic commodities.
Yes, the hoarding was severe.
There's a scenario described where a merchant could corner the local salt market to the point where one measure of basic salt cost the same as a measure of meat.
Which is a total market failure. So we are looking at two highly flawed extremes. If the market runs completely unchecked, you get predatory monopolies formed by private capital. The poorest citizens are priced out of survival just because a merchant decides to withhold supply to drive up demand.
But then, if the state overregulates and nationalizes the industry, you get the brittle plows. You lose all efficiency because the producer has no incentive to innovate.
And you introduce massive political corruption, what economists call power rent-seeking. Local Han officials who controlled the salt and iron distribution started enriching themselves because they held absolute dictatorial power over a necessary resource.
This ancient tug-of-war maps perfectly to modern economic crises. Like if we look at the 2008 global financial crisis, we see the catastrophic result of the literati's unchecked free market.
Absolutely. Financial institutions operated with minimal oversight, creating increasingly toxic, complex assets to maximize short-term profit. They hoarded risk until the entire system imploded.
And the average person lost their home. But conversely, if you look at sectors where governments attempt to impose heavy price controls, think of highly regulated housing markets in major global cities or heavily bureaucratized healthcare systems.
You often see the exact drop in efficiency that the Han Dynasty saw with its iron tools. Bureaucracy balloons, development stagnates, wait times become astronomical. The intention might be social protection, but the outcome is systemic friction.
So recognizing this internal pendulum swing between state control and free market chaos is it's critical for modern asset management. We were always living in an imperfect, fluctuating balance.
Right. And if you are structuring your career or your investment portfolio, you cannot wait for the political climate to stabilize into some perfect equilibrium. It won't.
It never does. If the macro environment swings toward deregulation, your primary risk management strategy has to be vigilance against private market manipulation, speculative bubbles, corporate hoarding.
And if the pendulum swings heavily towards state intervention and increased taxation, your strategy must pivot toward identifying the inefficiencies that will inevitably arise. You have to find the legally permitted avenues of private innovation that can solve those state-created bottlenecks.
Right. Now, this inherent instability in the macro environment brings us to a really harsh reality about the micro environment, like the individual's ability to actually accumulate capital.
The discourses on salt and iron is incredibly blunt about the nature of the wealth gap. It observes that wealth, almost like a gravitational force, naturally concentrates into the hands of the strong and the established.
Sociologists call this the Matthew effect, right? The rich get richer.
Exactly. But the ancient scholars didn't just observe the phenomenon, they dissected the mechanical advantages that create it. They identify 3 specific compounding advantages that the wealthy possess over the working class.
First is information. They simply see further. Because of their position, they have access to macro-level data, geopolitical shifts, and market trends way before that information trickles down to the general public.
They can position themselves before the event even happens. The second advantage is resources, but not just in terms of purchasing power. The text points out that wealth provides the ultimate luxury, the capital to afford trial and error.
Oh, that makes so much sense. If you are a laborer living hand to mouth, your margin for error is exactly zero. One bad harvest or one failed venture, and you are destitute.
But if you have accumulated capital, you can launch 5 different merchant expeditions. 4 ships might sink, but if the 5th one returns with a highly lucrative cargo, you still compound your overall wealth. Capital is a buffer against the inherent randomness of the world.
And the third advantage is connections. Social networks act as geometric multipliers.
Right. The wealthy associate with others who control information and resources. It creates these closed loops of opportunity, joint ventures, and access to credit that a solitary individual simply cannot penetrate.
Honestly, we stop right there. The text basically describes an inescapable caste system. It sounds like if you aren't born with capital, you are mathematically doomed to remain at the bottom.
It does sound bleak, but the text actually offers a strategic exit. The scholars reveal that escaping this gravity well does not come from merely increasing your physical labor. The text states, "The wise have surplus, the stupid have deficit."
We have to carefully define those terms, though. Wise and stupid in this ancient context have nothing to do with inherent intelligence or formal education, do they?
No, they don't. They are referring entirely to cognition, the deep structural understanding of how systems operate, the ability to read human behavior, and the mastery of market timing.
The text uses the hierarchy of salt merchants to illustrate these varying levels of cognition, and it's a fascinating blueprint for modern business insight.
It really is. Let's look at the lowest tier of merchant. They operate on basic cognition. This is straightforward arbitrage. You find a coastal town where salt is cheap, you buy it, you haul it inland to a town where salt is scarce, and you sell it.
It's reliable, but it is linear. Your profit is directly tethered to the physical miles you can travel and the weight you can carry. It is basically hard labor masked as commerce.
Exactly, but then you look at advanced cognition. This is where the merchant stops moving the product and starts analyzing the consumer.
Right. The source notes that high-level merchants realized different regions had distinct, subtle flavor preferences. Southerners preferred slightly sour profiles, while Northerners wanted heavily salted foods.
So instead of trading generic salt like a raw commodity, these merchants segmented the market. They tailored and processed their goods to meet these specific, unarticulated regional desires.
And by doing so, they stopped competing on price. They offered a specialized product that commanded a premium, multiplying their margins without increasing their physical labor.
They work smarter by understanding the psychology of the end user.
And then the text outlines top-tier cognition, which is the apex of wealth generation. And frankly, it is deeply manipulative.
It is. The highest level merchants wouldn't even wait for natural market forces to dictate demand. They would actively engineer it.
The source describes merchants spreading rumors of an impending border war or a famine to induce widespread public panic.
The panic instantly spikes the perceived value of essential goods. The demand curve goes vertical, not because of a real shortage, but because of engineered fear.
Then the merchants just sell their carefully hoarded inventory at astronomical markups. They manufactured a psychological environment that forced the consumer to hand over their wealth.
When you read that, you realize this 2,000-year-old manipulation is the exact foundational blueprint for modern consumerism.
Think about the entire machinery of modern marketing, like the engineered hype cycles around limited edition sneaker drops or the artificial urgency of a 24-hour flash sale, Black Friday.
The mechanism is identical. Modern consumerism rarely fulfills a genuine biological or structural need. We are largely insulated from true scarcity. Therefore, to generate continuous, compounding corporate profit, top-tier cognition must be employed to manufacture desire.
It creates artificial scarcity, social anxiety, or the fear of missing out, and then conveniently positions the product as the only cure for that engineered discomfort.
So if you are listening to this and trying to figure out how to navigate the modern economy, your primary objective must be a cognitive upgrade.
You cannot simply put your head down and work harder at the arbitrage level. You have to train your business insight to spot market segmentation. Where are people settling for generic solutions when they secretly want specific ones?
And equally important is defensive cognition. You must train yourself to recognize when you are the target of someone else's top-tier manipulation. Are you purchasing an asset because it solves a genuine friction in your life, or are you buying it to soothe an anxiety that was artificially implanted by an algorithm?
That's such a good point. But this leads to a massive systemic problem, doesn't it? If we train everyone to upgrade their cognition, if everyone realizes that basic labor is a trap and tries to become a high-level strategist, the system inevitably jams.
Yeah, it does.
Like if everyone is a mastermind who is actually mining the salt.
You were describing the exact mechanism of cognitive inflation, which leads directly to the modern crisis of workplace involution. In Chinese, the term is neiwan.
Right, and the ancient scholars recognize this dynamic. When the baseline level of education, ambition, and strategic awareness in a population rises, but the actual number of high-leverage opportunities, the seats at the top of the hierarchy remain static, the competition becomes cannibalistic.
The classic metaphor for involution is a crowd watching a performance in a stadium. Someone in the front row stands up to get a better view. To compensate, the person behind them stands up.
Soon, the entire stadium is standing. Everyone's legs are burning. Everyone is exerting maximum effort. But no one has a better view than when they were all comfortably seated.
It is a zero-sum exhaustion loop. In the modern corporate environment, we see this constantly. A bachelor's degree used to guarantee a comfortable middle-class trajectory. Now the market is saturated with degrees.
So people get master's degrees, they work 80-hour weeks, they take on endless side projects just to maintain their current position. The effort inflates exponentially, but the yield stagnates.
Exactly. So how did the Han Dynasty scholars suggest escaping this? Because fighting harder inside an involuted system just destroys your mental and physical health?
The text proposes a specific strategic pivot, riding the trend, or Cheng Shi Wei. It argues that instead of battling for marginal gains in a saturated arena, you must align yourself with macro forces that provide natural lift. They categorize these forces as heaven, earth, and human.
Heaven represents the massive, overarching macro trends, geopolitics, technological paradigm shifts, and economic seasons. Earth refers to geographical or structural advantages, like positioning yourself where resources naturally flow.
Like a border town capturing cross-border trade.
Exactly. And human refers to the leverage of social networks and institutional alliances.
Let's do a rapid-fire mapping of these ancient trends to modern business environments. The text explicitly points out that during a time of war, the smart money didn't try to optimize farming. They pivoted entirely to investing in military supplies and logistics.
Today, the equivalent macro trend is the weaponization of the digital landscape. War has largely shifted from territorial conquest to data disruption.
So if you are in the tech sector, fighting for a saturated software engineering role is involution. Pivoting your expertise into cybersecurity, defense tech, or sovereign data infrastructure is aligning with the heaven trend of global conflict.
Right. And if ancient peacetime meant investing in transport carts to facilitate trade, my mind immediately goes to the 2010s e-commerce boom. Amazon didn't just sell the goods, they built the digital carts, the AWS server infrastructure, and the physical logistics fleets.
Is that what riding the trend means here? Building the roads others have to travel on?
Exactly. When trade is expanding, the ultimate leverage isn't in making the product, it's in owning the distribution channel. Today, that translates to investing in supply chain resilience, API integrations, and platforms that reduce the friction of global digital trade.
The ancient text also points out that during a famine, the highest cognition play was investing in grain storage and distribution.
In our modern context, famine translates to systemic stress. Climate events, pandemic disruptions, energy shortages. The macro trend is crisis management and essential commodity resilience.
The entities that figure out how to reliably deliver absolute necessities like water purification, localized renewable energy grids, resilient agricultural tech when global systems strain, they're the ones who capture massive, non-involuted value.
Which perfectly tees up the biggest macro trend of our generation. The source draws a parallel that completely reframes how we should view the generative AI revolution.
Oh, this is fascinating. We are watching large language models and machine learning disrupt every cognitive industry. And the text points out that the invention of iron tools in the Han Dynasty operated on the exact same psychological and economic mechanics as AI does today.
When iron tools first appeared, replacing bronze and stone, it was viewed as a terrifying disruption. The text indicates that traditionalists panicked. They believed these new, powerful implements would destroy the old ways of life.
that it would render skilled craftsmanship obsolete and cause mass unemployment among the peasantry.
It is the exact same existential dread we see today from writers, coders, and analysts who fear a language model is going to instantly vaporize their 10 years of specialized experience.
But the text notes the behavioral difference in those who thrived. The high cognition individuals didn't waste time protesting the existence of iron. They didn't write petitions demanding a return to stone tools.
Right. They immediately dropped what they were doing, acquired the iron plows, learned to wield them, and vastly increased their personal productivity. They captured the wealth, while the traditionalists were still debating the morality of the new technology.
So for the modern office worker trying to escape the stadium where everyone is standing up, AI is your iron plow. Stop agonizing over whether the AI is going to replace your specific job title. You have to focus on what the source calls your knowledge conversion rate.
And your knowledge conversion rate is the metric of how efficiently you can take a complex concept in your brain and manifest it into a tangible, valuable asset in reality.
Historically, that rate was heavily bottlenecked by manual execution. Like how fast you could type, how fast you could code, how fast you could draft a legal brief.
Generative AI shatters that bottleneck. It drastically lowers the friction of output. If you are the first manager in your department or the first freelancer in your niche to deeply integrate AI into your workflow, you aren't just working 20% faster. You are fundamentally altering your leverage.
You can synthesize data, draft frameworks, and execute strategies at the speed of thought. You become the single farmer with the iron plow in a village of people stubbornly digging with wooden sticks. You escape involution by changing the game you are playing.
However, this aggressive adoption strategy introduces a massive risk factor, especially for startup founders and investors. If we are instructed to constantly seek out the new iron tools and ride the macro trends, how do we distinguish between a genuinely revolutionary technology and a highly sophisticated speculative bubble?
That is the multi-million-dollar question. How do you separate the next internet from the next crypto scam? The ancient scholars had a brutal, highly effective litmus test for this, rooted in their debate over what constitutes legitimate commerce.
The source explains that the Han Dynasty thinkers rigorously distinguished between fundamental, value-creating work and what they called mozuo.
Mozuo translates roughly to superficial or insignificant work, right? But in practical economic terms, it describes zero-sum speculation, activity that generates profit without generating underlying societal value.
The classic example of mozuo in the text is the merchant who hoards rice during a shortage purely to artificially inflate the price. They aren't growing more rice, they aren't improving the agricultural yield, they are just weaponizing scarcity to extract wealth from a desperate population.
And Sang-Hong Yang used examples of mozuo to argue that all private commerce was inherently parasitic and needed to be controlled by the state.
But the literati fiercely defended true commerce. They outline a framework that is identical to modern value investing. They argued that a legitimate merchant takes goods that are gathering dust in a warehouse, what we would call dead capital, and moves them to a location where they are desperately needed.
The literati recognized that value creation isn't just about manufacturing a physical object. The merchant absorbs the immense cost of transportation. They risk capital against shipwrecks and banditry.
Crucially, they solve an information asymmetry. They figure out who has a surplus and who has a deficit. By bridging that gap, they convert dead capital into dynamic, useful capital. That resolves real-world friction.
Let's apply this ancient litmus test to modern resource allocation. If you are a startup founder deciding which product to build, or an investor deciding where to deploy capital, you must ask, is this venture solving genuine friction, or is it highly sophisticated mozuo?
Take high-frequency trading firms. They spend billions of dollars to lay dedicated fiber optic cables in perfectly straight lines, boring through mountains, just so their algorithmic trading models can execute a stock purchase 3 microseconds faster than a competing firm.
Are they moving dead capital to a place of need, or are they extracting fractions of a cent from the market ecosystem without actually improving the economy's fundamental productivity?
It is a subject of intense debate. But through the lens of the discourses on salt and iron, much of high-frequency trading looks dangerously close to mozuo. It is highly optimized extraction rather than fundamental creation.
Let's look at another one. Institutional real estate investment. If an investor buys a dilapidated, unlivable house, completely renovates it, brings it up to modern energy codes, and sells it, they've absorbed risk and genuinely improved the asset base of the community. They solved friction.
But if a massive private equity firm uses its outsized capital advantage to buy up entire neighborhoods of starter homes, completely restricting the supply to force families into permanent renter status while riding the passive asset appreciation.
The literati would classify that as hoarding rice. It transfers massive wealth upward, but it does absolutely nothing to solve the underlying friction of housing scarcity. In fact, it exacerbates it.
The critical takeaway here is about long-term wealth compounding and risk management. In a hyper-volatile modern market, speculative hype cycles will always offer the allure of rapid, outsized returns.
But if your entire asset allocation strategy is built on Mozovo chasing zero-sum transfers of wealth, you are building a portfolio on sand. Eventually, the market logic corrects itself, or the state intervenes to stop the hoarding, and the speculative value evaporates.
To protect your wealth across decades, you must anchor your capital in ventures that demonstrably reduce friction and create undeniable utility.
Which brings us to the final and arguably most profound layer of this ancient text. Beyond the mechanics of state monopolies, beyond the cognitive upgrades and the market strategies, the true beating heart of the discourses on salt and iron is the ideological war over the philosophy of wealth itself.
It is the collision between making a profit and maintaining a moral compass.
桑弘羊, representing the state apparatus, operates as a pure, unfiltered utilitarian. His argument is incredibly modern. He claims that the desire for profit is as natural as water flowing downhill.
Humans are inherently selfish and driven by material acquisition. Therefore, the state shouldn't waste its time trying to morally educate the populace. It should pragmatically harness that greed.
Build a system that uses the lure of profit to incentivize people to do the things the empire needs, like building infrastructure or funding the military.
It's essentially a state-managed version of Adam Smith's invisible hand. But the literati reject this completely. Their counterargument is that humans are not water. We are not merely a collection of base instincts governed by economic gravity.
We possess conscience. We possess societal obligations. If a state builds a system where every single action, policy, and human interaction is measured exclusively by the metric of profit, the social fabric tears, humans devolve into predators and prey.
But the text doesn't end in a stalemate between pure greed and ascetic poverty. It arrives at a powerful synthesis. The ultimate wisdom presented in the source is a framework called Yili Bing Zong,
which translates to placing absolutely equal simultaneous weight on righteousness, social morality, and profit. The pursuit of wealth is legitimate and necessary, but it must operate within a strict ethical boundary.
The challenge is how Yili Bing Zong survives contact with the cutthroat reality of modern corporate decision-making. Can you truly balance societal responsibility with shareholder demands for endless growth?
Let's run a corporate simulation on this, because the source points to a few modern tech giants as potential examples. Take Microsoft. Under its current leadership, the explicitly stated mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more.
That is the righteousness component. The framing is about providing infrastructure for human potential.
And simultaneously, Microsoft generates astronomical, world-altering profit margins. The theory here is that the two forces are not in opposition. The righteousness, the genuine utility provided to billions of users, is the engine that drives the profit.
Or look at Elon Musk and Tesla. The core mission of the company isn't explicitly to make cars, it's to accelerate the globe's transition to sustainable energy.
That is a massive moral imperative, attempting to solve an existential threat to the species. And by aggressively attacking that moral problem, Musk became one of the wealthiest humans in history.
But we have to apply critical analysis here. Are these massive corporations truly operating on a moral imperative? Or have they simply realized that saving the world or empowering humanity is an incredibly lucrative total addressable market?
Is the righteousness genuine? Or is it a marketing strategy deployed by top-tier cognition to manufacture consumer loyalty?
That is the exact tension the ancient text demands we navigate. The line between genuine moral alignment and cynical PR is razor thin. But the text warns us about the severe consequences of failing to maintain that balance, particularly when it comes to generational legacy.
The source observes a fascinating, almost haunting historical pattern. It notes that new money families merchants who hit a speculative windfall or successfully exploited a temporary market monopoly without a corresponding moral foundation almost always lose their wealth with stunning rapidity.
Within a generation or two, the capital is entirely gone.
We see this exact phenomenon today. The lottery winner who goes bankrupt in 3 years, the tech founder who cashes out early, loses their tether to reality, and destroys their reputation and portfolio through sheer hubris.
The ancient text diagnoses exactly why this happens. It's because wealth is not an end state. It is an amplifier. It is kinetic energy. If a family lacks the cognitive discipline and the moral framework to handle that energy, the wealth amplifies their worst traits.
Paranoia, unchecked greed, and poor decision-making accelerate their ruin. They treat the money as the final goal, rather than a tool for continuous value creation.
Conversely, the text explains the survival mechanism of true old money. The families that survive multiple generations, navigating through wars, famines, and regime changes, don't do it just by setting up clever tax shelters or ironclad trust funds.
They survive by aggressively passing down a specific culture. The ancient scholars stated a core principle: having wealth means you must educate.
Passing down capital without passing down the operational cognition and the moral restraint to manage it is essentially handing a loaded weapon to a child. True asset preservation is entirely dependent on the character and the philosophy of the person inheriting the capital.
So the immediate actionable takeaway for you, negotiating your path through the modern economy, is to actively deconstruct the extreme arguments of both桑弘羊and the literati in your daily life.
When you are evaluating a career move, negotiating a contract, or building a startup, you cannot be purely cynical, driven only by the maximization of capital at the expense of your community. That leads to systemic collapse.
But you also cannot afford to be purely idealistic to the point of financial martyrdom. You must demand compensation for the friction you resolve. You have to aggressively seek out that complex, nuanced middle path.
Your long-term financial goals must intimately align with the creation of genuine, tangible societal value.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, pulling thousands of years of economic theory into the present moment.
It is remarkable how the underlying mechanics of human ambition and resource allocation have remained entirely unchanged.
Let's summarize the map we've extracted from this ancient debate. We started by confronting the eternal contradiction between state control and free markets. We realized that there is no perfect economic system, only a constantly swinging pendulum.
The modern professional must learn to adapt their risk management to the current regulatory climate rather than waiting for ideal conditions.
We dissected the nature of the wealth gap, realizing that the compounding advantages of information, capital buffers, and networks can only be overcome through a deliberate cognitive upgrade. You must move past basic arbitrage and train your insight to recognize market segmentation and engineered demand.
We tackled the psychological exhaustion of modern workplace involution. We established that the only way to stop fighting for marginal gains in a saturated arena is to ride the macro trends aligning with the heaven, earth, and human forces.
We recognize that generative AI is our modern iron tool, and that increasing our knowledge conversion rate is the key to escaping the zero-sum competition.
We applied the ancient litmus test of Mozuo to modern startups and investments, learning to protect long-term wealth by allocating capital exclusively to ventures that solve real friction rather than chasing the hollow returns of speculative hoarding.
And finally, we explored the ultimate philosophy of wealth, acknowledging that capital is neutral kinetic energy. Without the stabilizing force of Yi Li Bing Zong, the equal weighting of profit and righteousness, wealth is transient and ultimately destructive.
If there is one overarching meta lesson to draw from the discourses on salt and iron itself, it is the profound power of rational, sustained debate. We live in an internet ecosystem that algorithmically rewards polarization. We are constantly pressured to adopt black and white, absolutist positions.
You are either a ruthless capitalist or a complete socialist. You are either entirely pro-technology or a neo-Luddite.
The nuance is systematically erased, but this 2,000-year-old transcript proves that truth, sustainable governance, and genuine wisdom almost never reside at the extremes. They live in the complex, highly uncomfortable middle.
The ability to listen to opposing, extreme viewpoints, extract the mechanical truths from both, and synthesize a workable strategy without losing your ideological balance is a supreme cognitive superpower in the modern world.
I completely agree. And that synthesis brings us to our final thought for today's deep dive.
I want to leave you with a concept that fundamentally challenges how we view security. We spend vast amounts of our waking energy trying to accumulate physical and digital assets. We meticulously diversify our portfolios, we buy real estate, we squirrel away cash in high-yield accounts, all in an attempt to build a fortress around our future against an unpredictable world.
But if these ancient Han Dynasty scholars are correct, if the mechanical reality of the world is that wealth automatically flows toward those with upgraded cognition, while simultaneously and violently destroying those who lack virtue and a moral compass,
then our entire definition of risk management is flawed. The ultimate hedge against inflation, against the AI revolution, against market collapse, has absolutely nothing to do with how cleverly you diversify your stock portfolio.
the ultimate unshadable asset allocation strategy is investing relentlessly in your own character, your moral baseline, and your cognitive agility.
So look closely at where you are directing your time and energy right now. Are your current investments of attention making you a more adaptable, sharper, and deeply grounded thinker? Or are they just making you a more anxious, well-funded hoarder? Keep questioning the systems around you, keep upgrading your cognition, and we will see you on the next deep dive.